and I'm a former Zamir singer, and I have the privilege tonight of offering a few words about our honoree. Azamra Elohai Be'odi. I will sing to my God with all my being. These words from Psalm 104 are fitting words to describe Rav-Hazzan Scott Sokol. I remember when I met Scott for the first time. It was probably after that. No, maybe not. A few weeks into the fall of 1991, my 5th year singing with Zamir, I noticed someone new at rehearsal, wearing a vibrant, multicolored, kind of hippie-ish shirt, with a head of black curly hair standing higher than the rest of us. Now, in those days, Josh would often start rehearsal by having us stand in a circle and give each other back rubs. And after we had loosened up, he'd have us stand there to work on blend through tone matching. So each week, he'd ask someone to sing, do, re, mi, fa, sol, mi, do. And then he would gradually invite people to sing along one at a time, trying to match the tone of the first singer. So once a small group blended very well, Josh would bring in the entire section of sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses to try to replicate the sound. And then finally, he'd have the whole chorus do so. Depending on who Josh chose to start us off, we would create a very different sound. Sweet and bell-like, or rich and full, or assertive and powerful. And I've always found it miraculous to see how getting a group of people to truly listen to one another and then to emulate a single person's example can shift and lift the entire feel of the music. So on that particular evening, in our then rehearsal space at Hebrew College's former home on Hall Street in Brookline, Josh asked the new guy in the colorful shirt, who had auditioned in private a few days earlier, to sing that phrase for the group. And out came a gorgeous voice, warm and strong, silky and enveloping. And I remember catching the eye of a friend as we shared in the joy of hearing Scott sing for the first time. And I remember how the tone matching exercise transformed the circle of singers that night. How Scott's example lifted our voices and brought us together in listening to one another, and through listening and through following Scott's example, creating a moment of beauty. That was the first time that I recall Scott's presence transforming our group of singers, but it was far from the last. And none of us knew that night that Zamir would serve as Scott's own personal precursor to J-Date. To quote, and I have to give that line of credit to Rhonda Jacobson, who herself is the beneficiary of Zamir's early matchmaking benefits. So you see, a few days earlier, the lovely Francine Reichel, a neuropsych doctoral student at Brandeis at the time, was sitting at a sign-in table, and she was welcoming people who had come to audition for Zamir. So Scott signed in, and she thought she recognized his name. She had heard stories from her professor at Brandeis about a talented undergrad in his department who was now studying for his doctorate in psychology at Johns Hopkins. Well, it turned out that Scott had also heard Francine's name in connection with her research in neuropsychology. So over the months that followed, a relationship blossomed, and today Francine and Scott and their sons Benjamin and Samuel are a beautiful family. Scott has many talents and commitments, and somehow he manages to give his all to everything. He usually has at least 4 or so jobs simultaneously. And he still finds time to be a devoted and dedicated father, husband, son, brother, and friend. To quote Francine, remarkably, he does everything passionately and as if each job is the one and only job he has. In the past 20 years, Scott has served as Chazan of 2 shuls, rabbi of 1 shul, founding dean of the cantorial school at Hebrew College, holder of the Corman Family Chair of Jewish Special Education at Hebrew College, professor, researcher, and neuropsychologist at Mass General Hospital, and neuropsychologist in private practice, among other things. And he is soon to take on a new role in education. Scott also is a former assistant conductor, vocal coach, and bass section leader of Zamir, an accomplished violist, and a featured soloist in several Zamir recordings. And he brings music to others not just through his musicianship, but also through his organizational and leadership talents. Scott is the co-founder of Chorale, Boston's Jewish Community Chorus, the Kol Levi Quartet, Sheminiya, an octet of cantors, and Jazz and Jews, a professional jazz ensemble. But enough with the resume. Even though I did neglect to mention his many publications and the fact that he's a Fulbright and a Wexford Fellow, but I won't go there. Because even though Scott is a man of many talents, he's also a person of great humility and commitment to others. He leads by his example, so I will share a few examples. I heard a story from his friend David Fardman. David and Karen used to live on one floor of the two-family house while Francine and Scott lived upstairs. I think I have the floors right. David told me that every year, after Yom Kippur, they would all break the fast together, and during this time, Scott was working as the Rav-Hazzan at KI in Brookline, working all day while fasting, leading the congregation in worship, takes a lot out of a person. Yet back at the house for the break fast, it was Scott who was running around with the most energy, setting everything out to make sure everyone had what they needed. David said Francine worked hard as well, but he was really struck by how Scott, after the whole day of working for the congregation, was still making sure everyone was all set. Another anecdote. I spoke with a young man who was a counselor last summer at Camp Vermont in Palmer, Massachusetts. Following the Vermont tradition of marking the end of Shabbat with an hour of kavanah, which I'll translate here roughly as creating a meditative mood, this young man had invited Scott, who was working the rest of the time with special needs young adults, to come to his bunk of 11-year-olds to lead kavanah. I asked the young man to tell me about his experience of Scott in this situation. So what is Scott Sokol like? Scott is a guy who's really in touch with his spirit, Mom. Scott is so in touch with his spirit that he can't help but push others in the same direction, gently. He's kind of he's such a vessel a vessel for something. So for 4 Shabbat afternoons in a row, Scott led the campers in song and discussion. And my son told me, I've never seen an 11-year-old so excited about sharing what he dreamt last night and asking over and over, can Scott please come talk to us again tomorrow night? They didn't want to wait till the next Shabbat. So in addition to inspiring those middle schoolers at what some might view as a very tough age, Scott also connected with this then 18-year-old who told me, Scott is the first person who got me thinking about time as cyclical as opposed to linear. So not only is Scott a singer, a violist, a psychologist, a teacher, a learner, a leader, but he's a generous spirit, able to connect with people where they are, willing to meet their needs if he possibly can. I recall one part of the toast that Scott's sister Susan made at Scott and Francine's wedding. I'll paraphrase. Scott is the only person who can be driving from Boston to New York and convince you that a stop in Montreal to drop you off where you need to go is not on the way. Even with my sense of direction, Scott, I realized that that's extraordinary. And more recently, Susan told me how Scott helped out the choir she sings with, because she now does live in Montreal, making an MP3 file for her conductor to clarify some pronunciation challenges with Yemenite accented Hebrew. Scott's friend Larry Sandberg talks about how Scott would, quote, give you the shirt off his back and then ask if you need another one. How he never says no to anyone and how he's so accomplished yet so humble. Francine shared with me a story from the time that she and Scott were both working as psychologists at the Mass General Hospital's Institute of Health Professions. One of their colleagues there was amazed that Scott's talents ranged from teacher to scientist and diagnostician to musician and composer. So that colleague nicknamed Scott Whole Brain Man. Left brain, right brain, whole brain. It was said in humor, but everyone knew it was true, and that's why the nickname stuck. As I thought about that nickname, I thought about all that Scott does. He's read Torah at Auschwitz, he's sung the national anthem at a Red Sox game, recited the Hanukkah candle blessings at the Massachusetts State House. He's evaluated children with learning challenges, taught teachers how to differentiate instruction, taught cantorial students how to lead davening, led congregations in worship, comforted friends in need, celebrated with friends and family, been a wonderful father to Benjamin and Sam, and a loving husband to Francine. Whole brain man, I would add whole soul man as well. So I'll quote from Scott's own words. When Scott was interviewed last year by a local paper about taking on the job as Rabbi of Temple Emmanuel in Marlborough, Massachusetts, he shared what he loves most about it. This is the quote: "It gives me the opportunity to serve." And in a 2001 piece that Scott published in the Journal of Synagogue Music, it's entitled "Seeking the Faith to Hope." And in this article, Scott discusses how King David, quote, perceives that even the inspiration to sing is itself a divine gift. And that is a concept which Chazzanim no doubt resonate with. It's clear to me, and I think to all of us, that Scott does not take his inspiration to sing or any of his gifts for granted. It's clear that he's grateful for his talents, he's grateful for his professional successes, his beautiful family and friends, and that he uses his divine gifts to serve others. And we who sing with or listen to Zamir, we who are inspired by the cantors and educators that Scott has taught, we who listen to Scott's magical voice, we who are grateful for the research and teaching that help the Jewish community embrace those with special needs, we who live in the communities that Scott has touched through his gentle example, we who are here tonight, we are grateful for Rav-Hazzan Scott Sokol. As Zamra Velohai Be'odi, I will sing to my God with all my being. That is how Scott lives his life, singing with all of his being, supporting individuals and elevating communities. So like that day in 1991, when 45 or so Zamirians stood in a circle and emulated Scott's voice, I hope we can also take Scott's example as our inspiration. So please come up here, Scott. And the planning committee for tonight's event, I would like to present you with this paper cut, designed and prepared by a very talented young artist, Rachel Jackson. And the paper cut says, "Zamra Velohai Be'odi." It's got Scott's favorite color, purple, in the background, and a little Zamir nightingale on the side. And the dedication on the back reads, "Presented to Rav-Hazzan Scott Sokol in appreciation of his many talents and his dedication to our community, Israel, and the Jewish people." The Zamir Chorale, Boston, June 6, 2013.
My life flows on in endless song, above earth's lamentation. I hear the sweet, though far-off hymn that hails a new creation. Through all tumult and the strife, I hear its music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing?
How indeed can any of us keep from singing? And why would we want to? I'm a proud Jew, a cantor, and a rabbi who's privileged to share spiritual leadership of not one, but two synagogue communities, and I look forward soon to directing the Metro West Jewish Day School in Framingham. Yet, despite my firm Jewish bonds, despite these Jewish bonds, there's another religion that beckons to me and that has been a part of my life as long as I can remember, and that is the religion of music. As Abraham Joshua Heschel aptly put it, the only language that seems to be compatible with the wonder and mystery of being is the language of music. Music is more than just expressiveness. It is rather a reaching out toward a realm that lies beyond the reach of verbal propositions. And so, on this night of music, it seems something of a diversion to resort to words in expressing my appreciation to the Zamir Chorale of Boston for honoring me tonight, and more importantly, for the work that they have been engaged in these past 44 years, preserving and adding to the precious legacy that is Jewish music. But in this case, words allow my appreciation to be a bit more direct. To borrow from the lyrics of a favorite jazz chart, what is this thing called Zamir? This funny thing called Zamir. In short, to me, and to many of us who have made Zamir an integral part of our lives, Zamir is a religious community. The word choir in Hebrew is makela, a word whose shoresh, whose etymological root, is kuf he lamed, kahal, which means community, and which is of course related to the word for congregation, kihila. Music, of course, exists in many forms, though perhaps none purer than the human voice. Although a single voice may have beauty, true meaning, I believe, must be found in a community of voices, a makela. This reminds me of an important teaching from Masechet Brachot 63b, Asu kitot kitot v'isku b'Torah, lefi she'en ha'Torah biknet ela b'chavura. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Hanina used to say, put yourselves into groups to occupy yourselves with the Torah, for the Torah can only be acquired in company. If this is true of Torah, it is equally true of music, and especially the Torah-inspired music of the Zamir Chorale of Boston. And so tonight, I would like to simply offer my thanks, first to the Zamir Chorale for this great honor. I admit that when Josh called me to ask if I would be the honoree over a year ago, I first thought he was going to ask for a favor. You know, one of those calls you get from Josh, like, the choir's been invited to Montreal to sing the Block Sacred Service. I'd love for you to be the soloist. I know it's your honeymoon and we have no money to pay you, but if you could, I'd really appreciate it. And of course you do it because Josh asked. So I thought it was one of those calls, and I was really pleasantly surprised to hear that I would be honored, especially coming from Josh, a person I always refer to as Rav-Hazzan, a teacher friend for whom I have enormous respect and admiration, and with whom I've had the privilege to work for these many, many years. So thank you, Zamir, and thank you, Josh. Thank you as well to Barbara Gaffin, Zamir manager, to the board and its chair, Robert Snyder, and the entire planning committee and volunteers, especially Myra Snyder, Rhonda Jacobson, Heather Zacker, Susan Rubin, and Larry Sandberg, as well as all the many other people who worked so hard to make tonight possible. I'm sorry not to thank each of you individually, but I greatly appreciate your collective efforts. Finally, thank you to my family, to my mother Carol, who throughout my life has always been my staunchest supporter, to my mother-in-law Sharna, whose closer presence in our lives this last few years has truly been a blessing, to my kids, Benji and Sam, who have to deal with a father who is pulled in so many directions and needed by so many people. But I hope and know that you guys understand that I do this for you. And of course, Acharon Chaviv, my wife Francine, who is a Tzur Olamim, an eternal rock of strength, compassion, companionship, and love, and who is ultimately the greatest honor that Zamir has bestowed on me.